The wind howled as I stood at the cliff's edge, the skeletal remains of Stormview Manor rising behind me. The storm clouds rolled in thick and fast, churning the sea into a frenzy of frothing waves below. I never intended to find myself here again, but Stormview Manor had called to me in a way I couldn't ignore. I'm Amara, a historian who has always been fascinated by relics of the past. This fascination has often drawn me to places others would shun, but never had I experienced anything like Stormview Manor. It began with an innocent enough discovery, a sapphire ring. The manor, even in its dilapidated state, had been breathtaking. Gothic arches, towering spires, and windows long since shattered by the relentless coastal winds. I was combing through its ruins, cataloging its history for a local preservation society, when I found the ring. It was nestled inside a jewelry box, hidden in the recesses of a shattered dresser. The sapphire caught my eye immediately, even through the dust and grime. Its brilliance seemed unnatural, as if it were alive, pulsing faintly with an inner light. A thrill ran through me as I held it up to the light, my fingers tracing its intricate silver band. A storm was brewing as I made my way home that evening, the ring now snug on my finger. I told myself I'd only wear it for a while, to feel closer to the manor's history, closer to her. My grandmother, the woman who sparked my love for history, had always worn jewelry with an air of grace. This sapphire felt like something she would have adored. I thought of her often as the days passed. The stormy nights, however, brought something else entirely. The first time I saw her, it was during the dead of night. I had fallen asleep with the ring on, my hand resting near my face. Thunder shook the house, and I awoke with a start. The air smelled of salt and rain, though my windows were shut tight. And there she was, my grandmother, or something that looked like her. Her form shimmered faintly, the edges blurred like a figure in a fog mirror. Her eyes were fixed on the ring, a deep sorrow in them that I couldn't comprehend. "Why?" she whispered. Her voice was layered, an echo in the void. "You shouldn't have taken it." I scrambled out of bed, my heart pounding, but she was gone as quickly as she had appeared. The nights that followed were no better. Each storm brought her back, her whispers growing more insistent, more accusatory. "You betrayed me, Amara." Her words pierced through me like icy needles. Betrayed her? How could I have betrayed her? I spent days obsessively researching the manor, desperate for answers. The archives held no mention of my grandmother ever visiting Stormview, let alone having any connection to it. But the ring, it was changing me. During the storms, its faint glow intensified, and with it came a flood of memories that weren't my own. I saw my grandmother as a young woman, standing in a grand ballroom, the sapphire glittering on her finger. The manor wasn't abandoned then. It was alive, filled with music, laughter, and a dangerous allure. I saw her meeting a man whose face was shrouded in shadow. He slipped the ring on her finger, and in that moment, I felt her hesitation, her fear. She tried to pull away, but it was too late. The room vanished, replaced by crashing waves and a stormy sky. "Return it," her voice urged me one night. She was closer this time, standing at the foot of my bed. Her translucent hand reached toward mine, her fingers brushing the sapphire. "Return it to the sea, Amara, or it will consume you, as it did me." The visions were unrelenting. Drowning figures filled my dreams, their faces twisted in agony, their arms outstretched toward me as if begging for salvation. The ring burned cold against my skin, a constant reminder of its cursed power. By the time the next storm rolled in, I knew what I had to do. The sapphire had to go back to the sea. The journey to Stormview Manor was harrowing. The rain lashed against me as I made my way through the ruins, the wind threatening to knock me off balance. The cliff's edge loomed ahead, the waves roaring below like a beast waiting to devour me. As I approached, the sapphire began to glow brighter, illuminating the night in an eerie blue hue. And then I saw her, my grandmother, standing at the edge, her eyes filled with a mixture of hope and sorrow. "You've done well," she said, her voice a fragile thread. "But there is always a price." I hesitated, the ring feeling impossibly heavy on my finger. "What price?" She didn't answer. Instead, she raised a hand toward the stormy sea. "Release it, Amara." With trembling hands, I slipped the ring off my finger. For a moment, it seemed to resist, as if clinging to me. Then, with a final surge of determination, I hurled it into the waves. The sapphire's glow vanished as it hit the water, and the storm quieted, as though the sea itself had taken a deep breath. I turned back to the manor, relief washing over me. But then I felt it, a coldness creeping into my chest, a weight settling around my heart. My grandmother was gone, her spirit free, but I was not alone. The wind whispered around me, carrying voices I didn't recognize. The sapphire had claimed me. I am bound now to Stormview Manor, a guardian of its cursed history, waiting. Someday, someone will find the sapphire again. And when they do, I will be there, a ghostly figure in the storm, warning them of the cost. But will they listen? I arrived at my grandmother's lodge on a Friday afternoon, just as the first snowflakes began to fall. It was exactly as I remembered from childhood visits, a quaint, two-story retreat nestled deep in the mountains, with a roaring fireplace and the scent of cedar lingering in the air. This place had always felt like a haven, untouched by the chaos of the outside world. I needed this weekend. After months of deadlines, rejection letters, and sleepless nights staring at a blank screen, the thought of isolation in this snowy paradise was a balm to my frayed nerves. The first evening passed in quiet comfort. After lighting a fire, I unpacked my belongings and settled into my grandmother's favorite armchair, a cup of tea in one hand and her jewelry box in the other. She had left it to me in her will, along with the lodge, though I hadn't had the chance to go through its contents until now. The box itself was beautiful, carved mahogany with delicate floral inlays, and it creaked softly as I opened it. Inside lay a collection of brooches, earrings, and necklaces, each piece more ornate than the last. But it was the ruby necklace that caught my eye. The ruby was enormous, set in intricate gold filigree. It seemed to glow faintly in the firelight, its crimson depths mesmerizing. Without thinking, I draped it around my neck and fastened the clasp. The metal felt cold against my skin at first, but it warmed quickly, almost as if alive. That night, the snowstorm intensified. The wind howled, rattling the windows, and the world outside vanished beneath a blanket of white. I had just settled into bed when a sharp knock at the door jolted me upright. I hesitated. Who would be out in this weather? After a moment, curiosity outweighed caution, and I made my way to the door. The man standing on the porch looked like he'd stepped out of a nightmare. His clothes were soaked, his face pale, and his eyes, dark and sunken, seemed to bore into me. "My car broke down," he said, his voice trembling. "Please, can I use your phone?" Something about him set me on edge, but I couldn't turn him away. I stepped aside, letting him in. He used the phone briefly, muttering something about a tow truck, but he didn't leave right away. Instead, he lingered, his gaze fixed on my necklace. "That's a fine piece," he said, his tone oddly reverent. "Where did you get it?" "It belonged to my grandmother," I replied, clutching the pendant reflexively. His lips twitched into a strange smile. "It suits you." When I insisted he leave, his reluctance was palpable, but eventually, he stepped out into the storm. I locked the door behind him, every nerve in my body on high alert. Sleep didn't come easily that night. I kept replaying our interaction, wondering if I'd imagined the predatory glint in his eyes. Somewhere in the early hours of the morning, I woke to the sound of creaking floorboards. My heart leapt into my throat. Someone was inside. I grabbed the fireplace poker from the hearth and crept downstairs, each step an eternity. The living room was bathed in flickering shadows, the fire reduced to embers. "Who's there?" I called, my voice trembling. A figure emerged from the darkness. A man, his features obscured but unmistakable. It was him. "I've come to claim what's mine," he said, his voice low and menacing. Before I could react, the necklace tightened around my throat. It felt like icy fingers were strangling me. I dropped the poker, clawing at the chain, but it wouldn't budge. The man stepped closer, his eyes gleaming with unnatural light. "Give it to me," he whispered. Desperation took over, summoning every ounce of strength. I tore at the clasp until the necklace came free. I hurled it at him, and as it hit the floor, the ruby shattered into 1,000 shards. A blinding flash of light filled the room, and when it faded, he was gone. The storm outside had stopped, and an eerie silence settled over the lodge. The next morning, I found the caretaker shoveling snow outside. He greeted me warmly, but his expression darkened when I mentioned the necklace. "That thing's cursed," he said, shaking his head. "Legend has it, anyone who wears it is doomed. It's said to drive people mad, make them see things that aren't there. Your grandmother hid it away for a reason." I didn't tell him what had happened. I couldn't. Instead, I took the shattered ruby and buried the pieces deep in the snow, far from the lodge. I never wrote about that weekend. Every time I tried, the words refused to come. The memory of the man, the tightening necklace, and the ruby's sinister glow lingered like a shadow over my thoughts. I still think about it sometimes, though. On cold, quiet nights, when the wind howls through the trees, I can almost hear his voice, whispering from the darkness.